Hello, class. My name is Isabella Mendez, and I will be debating through the point of view of a constructivist on the topic of possible revival of the Iranian nuclear deal. Now, where we're going to start is we're first going to understand what exactly was the nuclear deal and what were the events that led to the formation of the Iranian nuclear deal. Now, we're going to have to go all the way back to the event that ultimately changed international affairs altogether. 9/11. 9/11 has just happened, and the world, especially the United States, is frantically trying to figure out how an event of national security got penetrated and what were the ways that could have stopped. A year after the 9/11 attacks took place, President George W. Bush gave a State of the Union address where he fully gave out a war cry practically against Iraq and any other nations that had nuclear weapons of mass destruction. Reason why President Bush went on this tangent about Iraq supposedly having nuclear arms was because this was a huge rumor. If we go back a little few years earlier, before 9/11, Iraq had recently expelled any foreign, foreign actors. And some of the diplomats who had left believed that the reason why they were being asked to leave Iraq was because Iraq had a illegal nuclear program happening and that this was the cause of 9/11. Like, they really went on for a big reach on making that connection to the terrorist group of Al-Qaeda. Now, President Bush, needing to get the public's continuation of an immediate reaction to 9/11, and with the war hawks in Congress, he saw this as a perfect opportunity to invade Iraq, starting the Iraq War. Along with President Bush calling out practically Iraq and going to war with them, he also listed a bunch of other countries, including Iran, and calling them rogue states. Now, the definition of rogue states is states that want weapons, nuclear weapons of destruction, with a possibility of passing it on to terror states. Now, it can be understandable for why this might have been a reason for George Bush to make this type of connection, because it's been known in the past that Iran had passed along terror weapons to terror organizations and countries with terror ties. But it has really garnished the whole reputation or the character of Iran as total, because he later on continues to blast Iran with calling them an axis of evil, which was a huge disrespect to the country and everything, because they had nothing to do with all of this. They just so happened to be wrapped up in the wrong bunch. During this time of panic, there was a reason for that, because there were a bunch of countries, especially ones that were identified as rogue states, who supposedly had nuclear programs. Now, how could rogue states have nuclear programs without the proper technology or resources? Well, it had also just been discovered during that time that a man, a doctor by the name of Abdul Qadir Khan, had an elaborate network in which he passed along technology that could be used to program nuclear weapons of mass destruction towards corporation, private, and more dangerously, non-governmental individuals. So this wasn't a proctor doctor that everyone was able to keep track of and technology and see what he's doing day to day. This man essentially was kind of passing notes under the table of different codings for type of nuclear weapons. This is what essentially was the base work, the foundation for Iran and their home project of their international nuclear program. Now, we're going to go back a little bit further, all the way to 1946. The reason why we're going to 1946 specifically is because the League of Nations has fallen apart. World War II just ended, and the world is horrified by all the different chemical and nuclear weapons that had just been given or introduced to the world. So here, the United Nations created an agency, a sub-agency to the organization called the International Atomic Energy Agency, also known as IAEA. And essentially, this agency was created to watch over peaceful or civilian use of nuclear energy. For example, some countries use nuclear energy not for weapons but to form electricity, especially in areas that don't have access to different forms of electrical foundations. Now, we're going to go a couple of years forward to 1957, which was just around the beginning of the Cold War of the United States versus the Soviet Union, where a treaty was made. And this treaty was known as the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, also known as the NPT. Now, what this treaty, which is underneath the agency, this treaty solidifies that non-nuclear states can't form any type of nuclear program. They unfortunately have to stay non-nuclear, or they can slowly progress throughout the years some type of technology or some type of software that can create nuclear weapons. Now, for the states that do have nuclear weapons, they can stay having their arms, but they have to have consistent visits with the agency in which superintendents can watch over the program and look at past programs and watch how they've progressed over the years. And they also have to share technology. So kind of like in a friendly world where we just pass information amongst each other on what we found or what we've discovered. But nothing can be withheld, and it is important that you have these unscheduled visits by the superintendents of the agency. Now we're going to go back to the modern time. We're leaving the Cold War and we're coming back to our age now. It is July 2015, and Iran has entered now the nuclear deal with the approval of the core nations of the United Nations, including the United Kingdom, United States, Russia, Germany, countries like that. Now, with Iran joining this, they were expected to reach some expectations. The expectations, of course, being outlined in what was in the NPT, the treaty that we just talked about, in which they had to reveal all their information from their past program before they entered the deal, and they also had to lower their uranium fossil manufacturing, because that type of metal that they were mining and producing is known to be used in nuclear weapons. And that was a reason why they wanted them in the deal, because they knew that if they created too much uranium, then there would be an issue, because this would lead countries to believe that they are building some type of nuclear weapon unchecked. Now, another inspection that they failed was they didn't allow the inspections. They forbade any type of unscheduled visits, and they also did not really lower their production of the fossil fuels of uranium. Instead, they kind of just slowly did it, not enough to lift an eyebrow, but enough for themselves that they knew that they'd be okay. Now, in the treaty, though, it wasn't like the countries were telling Iran, you can't do this, you can't do that. There were exceptions in the treaty that allowed Iran to expand their capabilities of production in a couple of years, and that they were allowed to produce fossil fuels more that they wanted in at least 10 to 15 years of signing the deal. Now, this whole deal was created because also at the time, Iran was having a bit of an aggressive front in the region, and the world thought that by entering this deal, Iran would slow down and moderate it. That actually did not happen at all. That's also one of the reasons why President Trump at the time backed out of the deal back in 2018, because he called this deal laughable and basically chaotic, because this didn't do anything but kind of allow Iran to keep doing what it's doing, because they weren't following the rules of. But the way that we are going to analyze this whole deal and this whole event that happened isn't going to be through the realist or the liberal perspective. Now, if we remember what the realist perspective is, realism believes in a sort of power bargaining, while liberalism believes that all situations can be explained and executed through forms of diplomacy and negotiations. While the view that we're going to look at is called constructivism. And constructivism is a perspective that emphasizes ideas such as the content of language and social discourse, over institutions and power. So we're not looking at the like black and white of the situation. We're going to understand what is the differences that Iran sees when recognizing the Western in any type of international deal. What is the sentiment between the two nations and their peoples for why the deal didn't work out, and why was there always a sense of mistrust within the deal itself. So we are going to go through 8 levels of analysis. First analysis that we're going to talk about is how there was a fraternal commitment that Iran had a sentiment for basically wanting to have a one unified world under the religion of Islam. So keeping this fraternal sentiment, it made sense why Iran kind of was always like looking over their shoulder with the United States, because they just saw the US raid Iraq with no proof but other than a rumor. They are seeing what Russia and the United States are doing to Afghanistan right now. They're watching the Arab Spring happening in Egypt. They are watching practically their brothers and sisters under the religion of Islam getting continually obliterated by foreign actors who come in, which is another analysis, which is exploitation, but essentially we'll go into it now. But how foreign powers continuously will exploit the more inferior countries who don't have that much capital, because they believe that it's their God-given right due to the power and resources that they have that the other countries such as Iran lack. The second social construct that we will look at is more into the religion of Islam itself. Reason being why is that there is a rule in the Quran called the Nafi Esabil, which is essentially a law that says that there will be no law nor executive order or any type of dominance over the Muslim people itself. That the Quran essentially says that the Muslim people are protected by God, and that anyone that dares to dominate them goes against God. Now, this is something that Iran sees and notices because they're seeing how the foreign powers are continuously going towards them, going against all their other neighbors. So they see this as a kind of disrespect on their behalf of the Muslims. Now, the third level of analysis is throughout the 19th and 20th century, unfortunately, Iran has been a subservient or a dependent on the West, whether it be through trade, security, or any form of treaty or expectations. So, for example, the reason why Iran so badly withheld information of their past programs of their nuclear deals when they entered the Iranian nuclear deal was because they believed that since they had access to something that the West so badly wanted, that it was a form of power over the West. So this gave them a little bit of kind of like credit to themselves because they had something that the West didn't have. And it made them feel good about themselves because they were tired of being the oppressed rather than the oppressor. Now, if we go into the next level of analysis, so we're at number 4 right now, is known as Persian nationalism. Now, reason why we're talking about Persia is we're going to talk about the Gulf of Persia and the countries that surround that. So with Persian nationalism, this essentially comes from the Shah, who essentially promised independence to Iran and always gave the Iranian people this type of nostalgic view of themselves and always told them, oh, look back at the time of the ancients. Don't you want to go back to such a beautiful time when the Middle East was thriving and the rest of the world was dying of plagues and nasty soap? Like, essentially, that's what he was talking about. And so Iran, the leaders specifically, believe that they descend from this type of level of leadership. And they kind of they look around at themselves and they're like, what the heck? How have we come to this day? We came from an empire of great people. We discovered math. We have art, calligraphy. We have the best things in the world. How come we are still stuck in the desert, yet everyone else is already in space? So there's kind of like a mistrack that Iran isn't able to connect And so they have this type of sentiment amongst everyone. Basically, how kind of people are like in the US today, how people be like, oh, I was born in the wrong century. I want to go back to this century. Iran is kind of like that with their nationalistic type of point of views, wanting to go back to the time of when their rulers truly were on top of the world and were continuously doing great things for the nation and for their repertoire. Next, we're going to go to the fifth level analysis, which is basically the discourse of the enemy. The enemy being the United States. I mean, it doesn't help that United States continues to infiltrate different groups, tries to create different type of guerrilla forces to put on their own type of leader, as we've seen them do in Latin America during the age of the communism. And we continue to see it through other states of factors, such as China with Taiwan, or continuously we see with Spain and the Philippines. It's a continuous thing with the United States always backing a country in some sort of unfair diplomacy. Whether or not the United States would like to admit that or not is way above our level of clearance. But the Iran will always see the United States as the one to blame, because they'll look back at the Iraq War and how they essentially do not care if the facts are wrong. They will go out to get a reaction. Now we'll go to the sixth one, which is essentially what we mentioned earlier in our first analysis, is the unity among all Muslims, which is essentially that brotherhood, that fraternal desire to continuously back the ones that share the same ideals with you. And which makes sense. You would want to support someone that believes the same as you or is brought up the same as you, because you understand one another. You're not being looked at differently because you look different, or you have different skin, or you have a longer beard, or you're known for riding camels. It gets rid of that Orientalist type of view and instead focuses more on who the person is to the core. Next, we have the jihad. Now, this is a controversial type of analysis because, as we know, the jihad is what's used for a majority of the terror groups, because the jihad essentially is a moral duty of warfare on behalf of Muslims to basically spread the word of Islam, and anyone that disagrees with it is essentially an enemy to God and must be struck down right then and there, and the person who strikes will have their place with God and the Prophet. Now, unfortunately, the jihad, yes, this is something that will influence Iran and their type of maneuvers, because, as we know, they have been known for giving arms to different terror groups who have also fought by this form of jihad. But this isn't something that really has a huge proliferation over Iran itself. Now, our final one that we're going to talk about is justice. Essentially, Iran does not agree with how the international system is ran, how the rules are. The way that they analyze things is that they see the world in a hierarchy, pardon me, where essentially they see that the countries with the most gains in the world, the most money and power and weaponry, has the most influence over everything. And while Iran is kind of like, well, we have the richest history, we know things, how come we aren't being recognized? These people are brainwashed essentially. So Iran really does want to have that type of power to kind of stir the world in a different direction, or to bring new different type of point of views. Now, I know that my classmates will try to say that, especially from the realist perspective, that the reason why the nuclear deal shouldn't be reprogrammed is because we can't trust Iran. We can't trust them. They've passed deals before to the different terror groups. They've withheld information of nuclear weapons, and they continuously just won't let anyone in the country. Then you have the liberal point of view. Well, we'll say, well, maybe by showing your guns off, that isn't going to have any form of effect, and that instead we should negotiate and figure out diplomacy. What trades should we do? What can we do? What can we offer them that they can offer us? Well, I'm here to debate that actually we shouldn't do either of that. We should actually understand these people and not the country. If you continuously put sanctions on a country, they'll just find their loopholes. Russia's doing it right now with Ukraine, and it's been proven on the Yale studies of international studies through the article called "The Atomic Bomb is What States Make of It." It essentially proved that just because you put sanctions on a country doesn't really do anything for the country itself. There's other countries that don't believe in what the West or what the main powers focus on, so they'll definitely find their means through them. So the way that would be a better way of redeveloping this nuclear program with Iran would be to help understand them, stop treating them like they're some hostile country, and actually show some care, give them sort of not a toot of their own horn, but kind of give an approach, especially the United States, with a type of good faith deal where the United States, Lord knows that they have a receipt list longer than Walgreens of all the type of atrocities they focused on. So there should be a deal with both ends, kind of like a double-edged sword. Iran gets cut, the U.S. will get cut. Something like that along the lines that'll prove that the U.S. is not enemies, that the United States and other countries are not trying to infringe on the glory of Iran, but also Iran should kind of continue to have pride in themselves and to get resources for themselves that can help them get to where they want to be. But it has to take the whole world to understand this. It can't be a one person takes all type thing, or I have more power than you. It has to be of a mutual understanding between two sovereign states. That is my case. Thank you.